Okay, so you just have to accept that recording message on your end. For anybody that's attending today that wants a copy of that recording, just shoot me an email. I will provide my email address in the chat panel, and I'll share it with you guys at the end of this session as well. Oh, bear with me here. I sent that message accidentally only to Kendra, but I'm going to send it so that all of you can see it via the chat panel. There we go. So again, I want to welcome all of you. My name is Linda Cabayas. I'm part of the Enterprise Success team at LabArchives. I'll be leading your session today, which is going to focus in on the LabArchives Electronic Laboratory Notebook, or some of you may prefer to call it Electronic Research Notebook. This is a sponsored software, sponsored service by the CU Denver Anschutz system there. So this is an enterprise license for you, which means there's no additional charge for you, your students, your researchers, your colleagues to use the LabArchives notebook. So we're going to take about the next hour or so to really introduce you to the notebook, talk about the benefits, and also how you can get started, and really kind of give you a feel for how you get your data in the notebook, how you're able to manage it, use it for collaborative purposes as well. And then also an important aspect of the notebook is access management. So as I mentioned earlier, questions, comments along the way, feel free to take yourself off of mute, or you can just type in your message into the chat panel. Before I jump into the PowerPoint, I do just want to point out your local page that's been created here, and you'll see it here available to you. So under the Research Administration page, I can share the direct URL with you here momentarily. You'll notice I was clicking on some FAQs, so it's actually someone adjusted that URL there for you. Oh, bear with me here. I'll minimize that. It should give us a clean URL. Yeah, maybe not, but I'll be able to get to that here. I think if I close this, it may do it for me. Anyways, so this has been produced, created. It's managed by your research administration team here about LabArchives. What's nice here, it gives you all the information you need to know in terms of your benefits and how to get started. So as I mentioned, this is a tool that's being sponsored by your Office of Research here. You'll have information to help support resources, different quick start guides. There's a nice series of FAQs, but also there's your direct link to log in and create an account. We'll go through the account creation process today, but just a quick point out to make about that. It uses the internal single sign-on system that you all use really on a daily basis to access most of your daily resources. So that's the nice thing there. There's no additional need to manage a separate username and password when and if you want to use LabArchives. So I believe that if I strip this away, this will be our clean URL. Yes, it is. So I'm going to take this URL for you all and also put in the chat panel. So it's a nice takeaway piece here to refer to after our session. So now we'll go ahead and swing back into our PowerPoint. It's a short PowerPoint. We are going to spend really a majority of our time in the live demo phase, so actually going out directly into our product today. So LabArchives, as you know, some of our users like to call it an ELN, Electronic Laboratory Notebook. Others prefer Electronic Research Notebook. And really at its core, do keep in mind that LabArchives is discipline agnostic. It is a blank slate where as long as you have data to import and add, you can manage any kind of data in LabArchives. Through LabArchives, you have a secure place to store, search, share that data. You can also, there are a number of tools built in for collaborative purposes. So it's really easy to collaborate with colleagues, create shared notebooks, for example. Different communication tools are built in to aid in the collaboration as well. We are a cloud-based tool. So all you need is internet access, in order to use LabArchives. Now, of course, we're all talking about, this is a part of your data management plan. So the university has selected really LabArchives to store that research data for you. But we offer much more than just, a place to dump your data and store your data. You have an opportunity to upload any file type into LabArchives. As far as the data and metadata is concerned, the metadata is really important to us. We give you multiple opportunities to apply metadata. That's important because it's going to aid in the discoverability of that data. You may need to find a unique data set that you put into a notebook 2 years ago, for example. Using our metadata fields will really just kind of ensure and give you a better chance at locating that information quickly when you need it the most. You have full control when it comes to access and sharing. You decide that at an individual notebook level. By default, you as a notebook owner, the creator of the notebook, you're the one that has access. You then control that access. None of your site administrators by default have access to any of that data. It is completely private. Then, of course, you're in control of reuse, distribution, and if you use LabArchives, let's say in your lab for several years, naturally, you're going to collect notebooks over the course of time, and then you'll be able to use our different search tools for archival purposes or to be able to find those old data sets I mentioned before. Now, when it comes to creating an account, I pointed out through our page here earlier, I just want to go back to your local page. You will see a login to LabArchives link here, but you can also go out to mynotebook.labarchives.com to create your account. So it's a pretty easy process because of the single sign-on. So as soon as you go and enter in your email address, you'll be picked up by the single sign-on and you'll generate your account there. A couple of other resources to mention. First up would be our support team. So support@labarchives.com is where you can submit a support ticket with our team. So you have a great support team, global team, where we have staff members in the US, the UK, and Australia. Great news if you're based in North America, that makes for very long support days. Most days of the week, we're about 22 to 23-hour desk coverage. So you can always submit a ticket with a team member, big or small, any questions can go there. Need help, want to set up a screen share, for example, our team is happy to help you with that. Additionally, you have our knowledge base. So the knowledge base is available within the product. I'll point out how you can access that and use that. And basically, it's a library of online support articles all about the ELN and the use of the ELN. So up next, this slide is really going to illustrate for you how you can get in and kind of the core of managing your data in the ELN. So it all starts with entry types. This is just a sampling of some of the entry types that we support. Entry type is basically the mode that you'll get the data into the notebook with. We have a rich text entry where you can just basically type information directly into the application. You can upload attachments, for example. We also have a number of different applications that we integrate with. So these are our integration partners. Our current list is larger than this. This is just a summary of some of our key partners. But additionally to our integration partner list, keep in mind that you can upload any file type or any file format into LabArchives. So that can be unique proprietary software that your team has created, or image files that are generated off of a piece of lab equipment, for example. Any file type, any file format can be uploaded. Individual attachment uploads are limited to 4 gigabytes. So that's per attachment. At a notebook level, up to 1 terabyte of data can be stored. Do keep in mind that your license as an institution at the university level is for unlimited access, meaning as many notebooks as you want to create, you can do so. Then we come over to output formats. So your output format, of course, gives you the ability to download your notebook or download a component of your notebook. So I think, Jed, that should answer your question there too. You asked about if it's possible to store a local copy of your individual ELN. Absolutely. So you have 2 formats for downloading your individual notebook at any time. So you can download it in terms of what we call as an offline HTML-based notebook or as a PDF. So now permissions. So permissions are really important here to understand, because when you are a member of a notebook, you're going to play or fill one of these positions or roles within an individual notebook. So the center of their workspace is the notebook. By default, the first person or the person that originally creates the notebook, they become the notebook owner. So today, if after the session you go out into your account, you create a notebook, you own that notebook, nobody else has access to that notebook until you start inviting them. As a notebook owner, you have the privilege or the ability to invite colleagues to see your data. When you invite a colleague, you're going to use or fill one of these other roles here for them, because a notebook can only have one notebook owner. You could have an administrator. The benefit of an administrator is, like the owner, they can also manage access and invite people to the notebook. Another role here would be a user role. This role is really well suited for your traditional research team member. Their primary task is to add the data, edit the data, update the notebook, but they don't have the ability to manage access. You then have the guest role. So the guest role can be limited to view-only access, but by default, when you invite a guest to a notebook, they have 60 days read and write-only access. After that, it becomes read-only. The guest role is well suited for, could be an external collaborator, for example, could be a temporary, summer intern, grad student, for example. Now, here's what we often see in the academic environment, that the notebook owner is often the PI, the principal investigator. So especially if the team is adopting the ELN notebook and they're going to use LabArchives for all their team and research data. Just as, with the PI would own paper lab notebooks, they would own the electronic lab notebooks. Now, here's the big benefit then of the administrator role. PIs, busy people, maybe they don't really have the time to manage access to the notebook. So the PI could invite their lab manager, lab supervisor. They are well suited to be the administrator because then they can take the burden off of invitations and managing access of the PI. Now, here's the next thing that usually comes up where people will say, you know what, we've decided as a team, we're going to adopt the notebook. That's what we're going to use to store all of our research data. But it's going to be really difficult for me to get my PI's time to create all these notebooks and invite me to them. And let's say I'm playing the role of the lab manager. So here's what we recommend in for that reason, or what you can do to kind of combat that busy issue that PIs have. The lab manager creates the notebooks. Okay, so they create the notebooks, all the notebooks that are needed. So then the lab manager that's playing now the role of the administrator can transfer ownership of the notebook to the PI. When they transfer the ownership, they, as the former owner, become the new administrator. The great thing is that they retain the ability to manage access. So that's a common workflow and a strategy we see with that case. But keep in mind that this is flexible. It's really up to you to decide as a team what is best for you. You could have multiple administrators, multiple users, but you can only have one notebook owner. Some of you on the line today are really just attending for purposes of storing your own research data. Maybe as a team, the team's not quite ready to adopt, the ELN platform and structure. So you as an individual, create your own notebook, keep your own data there. Okay, so you may not ever have an administrator or user in your notebook, but if you should ever need them, it'd be easy to invite them. So let me get over actually to Karen's question. So Karen has a question about long-term collaborators. Would they need to be re-invited every 60 days? Well, what you might consider then, Karen, if they're a long-term collaborator, I would probably invite them as a user. Now, let's say, Karen, that user is part of your university. Well, they'll have the ability to create a LabArchives account that goes under your site, and that's pretty easy. I'd invite them as a user. What if, though, your collaborator is at a different institution, a different university, and that university doesn't have an enterprise license to LabArchives? So you've got a few options here. Now, that collaborator could pay for an individual license to LabArchives, but also, Karen, if you invite them and you invite them with their email address to your LabArchives notebook, and they don't have a LabArchives account or access to an enterprise license, they'll be creating what's called a free edition account to LabArchives. They will have full access to your notebook. You'll give them the user role. They can add data. They can edit data if you give them the user role. But the difference for them, that user, if they start creating their own notebooks, they're going to run out of storage space. But for collaborative purposes, they can fully collaborate in your notebook with a free edition account. So you have a lot of options there for collaboration. Now, this slide is going to talk a little bit about notebook structure. So it's flexible. It's a blank slate. We think that you should probably mimic the current structure maybe you're using in terms of how your team's working together and collaborating. At the center of this workspace is the notebook owner, and let's say this is the PI of our team. So then that PI owns 3 different notebooks, and they're all set up a little different here. The first notebook to the far left, this is an example of a project-based notebook. Project X is underway. Maybe there's multiple projects going on at one time in the lab that the PI is managing. Each project gets its own project-based notebook, and all the team members on that research team are invited to that notebook. They all have equal access opportunity to all the contents in the notebook, working together to manage and put data into the notebook appropriately, following the notebook structure, folder structure that you've created. Another type of notebook that's popular too would be an individual-based notebook. This is really going to mimic paper notebooks. Paper notebooks assigned to one individual researcher. That's where all your research data goes. So maybe from your lab, you don't really do project-based notebooks. You're going to have lots of individual-based notebooks. But the benefit of that individual researcher-based notebook, since it's electronic format, your PI has access to it at any point in time to provide feedback, as does, let's say, your lab manager, your lab supervisor. This is also helpful too, comparing to a paper system. You suddenly don't show up for work and come back. That notebook is still accessible by your PI and the lab manager. Then this other notebook could be set up as a lab-based notebook, where some teams will decide on one notebook for all lab business and lab notes. So for example, each user has access to that notebook, but they're putting their data into specific sections. So for example, Jenny is going to put all of her data in the Jenny notebook, in the Jenny folder, as is Angela and Brad, for example. We, in a team environment, we often see a combination of these. Sometimes what we'll see, for example, might be a notebook that's created just to organize protocols. A notebook that might be created for, protocols, lab business, meeting notes, for example. So it's very flexible. It can really go beyond just for research notes and research data. If you have anything that you need to organize, store, and manage, you can put it in LabArchives. So what we'll do here, we're going to flip back into my other tab that I have open, which is my LabArchives notebook. And we'll use this particular notebook for our demonstration today. So the rest of the time is just live demo time. When you first create your account, your drop-in point is going to be a little bit different because I, of course, have an open and active notebook on the screen. When you first come in, you'll all default to what's called a My Notebook. It's the first kind of starting point you see. That My Notebook you can use to update, create, add your own content, or create a new notebook if you don't want to use the My Notebook. I'll show you how you can do that here in a moment. But what I'll first start with is just kind of some navigation. We'll talk about the structure, the page layout, and then we'll go through the top of our points here to talk about some of the features that you see across the top. First up, of course, the obvious point is the structure of the notebook, left-hand side of the page. So it's hierarchical in structure, meaning you've got the name of the notebook. Within that reside folders. You can also have subfolders. Then you have your pages. Now, what a page looks like, you're in control of what that page looks like. Everybody's going to have kind of a different interpretation of what a good page looks like. Depends on the data you're working with. Here's one of my sample pages. I'm going to give you a quick tour of this page, and it just includes a variety of different entry types that we support, so you have a feel for that before we move further. This first record or entry is what we call a rich text entry. Type right into LabArchives. We've got numbered lists, bulleted lists that are available. This is an attachment upload. This is an image document. Image documents have annotation tools available. You can see I utilize that to circle that and apply a text label. Got another image-based attachment. This is a heading. Headings can be added to pages to kind of just separate the page, add some order, make things consistent. This is an Excel attachment upload. Office documents can be edited using Office Online. So when you hover over an Office document, you get this unique tool tray. Here's an example of an integration partner file upload. This is a GraphPad Prism document. I could select this and it'll launch me my GraphPad license. They've got some more image-based documents and a variety of different other entries that are available on the screen. Now, some of our teams like to apply or create page templates, where it really is a page that has sections split out and the order dictated in terms of what type of data goes here and where. Some of our teams like that, especially if you want to apply some consistency across the team in terms of what should an experiment page look like, for example. And I'll give you some examples of template pages that you can create. If we stick with this single record, I do want to point out this record utilizes tags. So you can apply tags to your entries as a controlled vocabulary, for example. It gives you a nice way to find and quickly locate like items. This document also utilizes our comment feature, which can be used to communicate with your team. Send a message to your PI, ask them to review your work, for example. This will send an email notice to the PI, but also it's available and visible within the record. And the key thing I want to point out here is your name, date, timestamp. This is all part of our revision history and audit trail, which is a really important aspect of LabArchives. And that's also part of the security and why so many university customers choose us to manage their data. On the back end, we use the National Institute of Standards and Technology as our official timestamp. So it's generated by a third party. That's important too, because that can't be modified, tampered with in any way for patent purposes. That'll hold up in a court of law. This will keep track of any time somebody makes an edit to that document. So for example, this entry has been edited a few times. If I go to the entry toolbar, click my More menu, and I go to View Revisions, I have a list there. Anybody that's worked with that document, touched it in any way. So you see when, who, you see a summary of the action. And then also important is the ability to revert to an earlier version. Somebody made a change that you disagree with. They made an error. You can revert to earlier versions. That revision also becomes one of your revised actions that's tracked. To also quickly show you, that was the revision history at an individual entry. But it's also important to point out that through the toolkit, upper right-hand corner here, you have a page revision. So you saw that this particular page was pretty big, had a lot of different entries, a variety of entries here. If I select View Revisions, now you'll see that history at the page level. Anybody that touched, edited, made some interaction, moved a document, for example, that is all tracked. So I do have a question here. Is there a way to disable document previews to condense the pages to just file names? Unfortunately, no. However, it depends on the file type too, Joseph, what you'll see. Images give you the nicest preview, kind of largest preview there, show up nicely. Now you could, of course, select them and download them. The Office documents give you like a first page preview of the document. You do have this flip section, but I will admit that often the previews for Excel is not very useful because of the size of the text, right? I mean, I can flip from page to page, but I can't read. I can't see what that says. But there are other file types. If I scroll down further, you see like CSVs. It's a smaller icon. So it's like a file type icon. Essentially, that'll show up. Okay, so you'll see that for a lot of most attachments that aren't Office-based, that aren't image-based, will give you an icon that looks more like this. Now, I'd like to swing back here to the structure of the notebook. I also want to point out our deleted items bucket. So it's important to note that in LabArchives, we do not, and this is intentionally so, allow you to ever permanently delete your data. If you do delete, let's say, a page or a folder, it goes into your deleted items bucket. And it stays there indefinitely until you undelete it. So you can't actually, delete it. So it's not like a 30-day purge where a lot of, like, say, email systems have that, for example. It stays there. And the reason is, well, sometimes we delete things by mistake, and we are talking about research data. This is your livelihood. This is very important to you. We don't want mistakes made where you accidentally delete something. Okay. And again, but it's also meant to help protect the integrity of the data as well, and to hold on to that complete audit trail of everything that's added to the notebook. Now it comes to the structure of your notebook. This is flexible, but just to get the structure started, all you really do is point and click at that New plus New button, where you'll add a new folder, add a new page. Also important is the fact that you have the ability to copy content. This is important because maybe as a team, you may decide to create a notebook that stores your protocols. Maybe that's going to store your templates, and it's all reusable materials for you to use in LabArchives. I can reuse that without, having to create that content over again from scratch. So for our demo today, let's add a new page. Let's see Anschutz, and we'll go ahead and click add. So now we have a new page. It's an empty page, and this is the page we'll use to upload all of our data today. But before we do that, let's go up to the top to your notebook list. As you're invited to different notebooks and create different notebooks, this is where you can pop in and out of the different notebooks that you own. Excuse me, I should take that back. Not only the ones that you own, but any that you have access to. The notebooks that are bolded, those indicate notebooks I own, meaning I'm in charge. I decide who has access. The other notebooks I'm a member of. So I could be an admin, notebook admin. I could be a user, maybe be a guest in that notebook. But this is where I can easily jump in and out of the different notebooks I have access to. It's also here, excuse me, where you create your notebook. So let's say you haven't used LabArchives yet. You get excited after this session today. You want to go out and create your first notebook. You do that by going to your notebooks list. You click on your plus symbol there. Really simple process. Give that notebook a name. You can choose a folder layout, although if you wanted to start from scratch, you would use no. This will preview for you our sample layouts. Maybe as far as structure goes, you're a little lost. You don't have any good ideas yet in terms of the structure. So you could use our lab layout. So these folders will be created for you. Now, of course, they'll be empty, no data. It's just the folders that we create, but you have the opportunity to rename them, edit them. You can pick them up and drag and drop them, move them around. In the future, also, let's say let's say you're the lab manager and you've decided that you're going to create notebooks for your team. You might do from another notebook, which allows you to reuse the structure from one notebook to the next notebook. And that's it. That's all it takes to create a notebook. I won't actually physically go through the steps today, only because I'm going to use the notebook that I've already created here. Remember, you can create as many notebooks as you like, unlimited access to those. We keep up at the top of our page here. This is our search menu. So it's a really powerful component and a great reason to move from a paper system to electronic system is the fact that you can search through your notebooks. No longer do you have to, flip page by page, hoping you grab the right paper notebook off of the bookshelf. You can do a quick keyword search across not only your current notebook, any of the notebooks you have access to. So as your team starts to create and generate different project-based notebooks, and you need to find a unique data set and you don't remember what notebook it's in, you can very quickly search across all those notebooks. Few things to point out here. Let's say you're doing a keyword search across all of your notebooks. You are also going to search within text-based attachments for those keywords. So when I say text-based attachments, we're talking about Word documents, Excel and PowerPoint, and text-based PDFs. If I just collapse this menu here, some of your other search areas include tags. So if you're utilizing adding tags to your documents, you can search for those. A date range, chemical smiles format, for example. If I keep moving over, also want to point out this bell icon is to our activity feed. Activity feed is going to keep track of the recent actions in the notebook. This is going to be really helpful for somebody that has some maybe notebook auditing responsibilities, PI, lab manager, for example, where you want to go in and look at recent activities. Who's been in the notebook? What have they done? Uh-oh, somebody's been deleting records. Those are the kind of activities and things that you can capture through the activity feed. The information icon, I do want to point this out because this is where you'll find our knowledge base. That's one of the URLs we pointed to earlier when we were also introducing you to our support team. So anytime you need help, you can come into the information icon. Now this we won't be covering here. This is the education edition or education module of LabArchives. It's a kind of separate component that we license for classroom use of LabArchives. There's another product that our that the LabArchives supports, and then we also make available for sale. And that's our inventory tool. This is not currently part of your license, but if you were ever in the market for an inventory tool to manage your lab inventory, if you selected that icon, it will prompt you to create a 30-day trial. And then our triple dot menu, which has some of our different advanced tools, such as, I think it was Jed that asked me the question about downloading your entire notebook. You can do that under utilities, for example. We'll come back to this menu in a little later on in the presentation, because this is where we're also going to talk about notebook settings, which is where you invite people to your notebook. So that was a kind of a quick navigational tour. We're going to swing back into the page that we created early that's empty. We're going to talk about how you can begin moving data and adding data to your notebook. I'm going to feature a few of our most popular entry types. If you select Create Something New, it opens our new menu, and this essentially houses our list of supported entry types. So it's a variety of different entry types available, which are, again, just ways to get the data into your notebook. We'll start with a rich text entry. Previewed this for you earlier. So basically, a little mini word processing tool built in. Type, copy, and paste your data in. So type directly in there. You want a numbered list, a bulleted list, for example. Variety of paragraph tools are available. Adjust your font. You can also insert links, which is really important when I'm going to stop and talk about that. In a moment, I'm going to talk about uploading attachments, okay? But there could be opportunities that where you don't want to upload the data to LabArchives, you want to link to the data. Maybe you have some sort of data in another service, in REDCap or some other repository that has a persistent URL. Put that URL into LabArchives, and then you could link out to that service or resource. You can also insert within the rich text entry images, video files, and create tables, for example. Math formulas, LaTeX is supported, for example. As soon as you click Save to Page, it becomes a fixture of your notebook. That's when it gets your name, date, and timestamp assigned to it. Also, each entry has its own unique entry toolbar. You saw that a few minutes ago. We went to view revisions, for example. Next up, let's talk about attachment uploads. I have a shortcut to attachment uploads here. When you're uploading attachment, you can upload up to 50 at a time. Again, 4 GB per attachment. So we'll just quickly grab a few attachments here. So I'm going to go to my training resources, my webinar folder, and I'm going to select an Excel document. And let's do a few image-based documents too. When you upload multiple files, they will all be a separate entry within the notebook itself. We talked about the importance of metadata. So here's an opportunity to describe the attachments that I'm uploading. Maybe I want a little note here. This is part of Project X. This description is also searchable. Okay. So you can see we've added that. Each attachment uploaded, each with my little Project X indicator or note here as well with the attachment. Next up, as far as entry types go, let's talk about headings. So headings technically do hold data. It is a way to also organize the content of your page. You'll notice in my notebook, my entries all go to the bottom of the page. That's a preference. It's a notebook setting. If you want your newer entries to fall to the top, you can adjust that. This time, though, what I'm going to do, I'm going to hover between an entry, use the insert flag, and that's where I'm going to direct my heading. Now, let's say that this is going to be my supplemental file section. So I'm going to use that to really organize my page. Maybe I want another heading at the top here to label that this is my protocol, for example. So this will help give your page some order. It's also what you would create a page template using. Page template's going to basically have some headers, and you've organized, and some placeholders for the different data and the type of data you want to upload to the page. Even the heading has a name, date, and timestamp. It's all a trackable part of your notebook. So I have a question that's come up about the use of touch screens. So if you were to use, bring up, let's say, LabArchives on a iPad, for example. So we've made some changes to our mobile devices where we actually don't have a physical mobile app that you download anymore. Technically, our iOS one is still in the Apple Store, but we've moved to what we call as a progressive web app, meaning if you have a mobile device and you want to bring this up on that mobile device, it's all browser based. Or even if you're talking about, maybe it doesn't have to be an iOS device, it could be a Surface Pro, which is basically a laptop with a touch screen, right? So you launch this from the browser. Now with touch screens, what happens? You essentially would be touching, how do I put this? If it was a rich text entry. I can't draw into a rich text entry with a touchpad. I'd be using the touchpad and basically using the keyboard feature to add in my text. Okay. So that's one of the key things there, that sometimes people assume that you can draw right into a rich text entry. You can't do that. Now, we do have a sketch entry, so let me go to that. However, our sketch entry isn't supported on mobile devices, but if you're using something like the Microsoft Surface Pro, it would be. Okay. Now, if you wanted to, or if you, so for example, you could add some extensions to your browser to support those kind of tools. So that would be a separate add-on to using it with LabArchives. So that's an extension or an application you add on top of your browser to support that kind of use. That, Pete, what I will do for you, there's a section in the knowledge base. If I can quickly find it, I'm going to give it to you right now. So just bear with me. Maybe I'm not going to be able to find it as quickly as I had thought. We have a separate help file when and if you want to use LabArchives, for sketch tools or writing directly into entries. I'm not going to find it as quickly as I had hoped. I thought it would stand out to me in terms of where it's organized. So let me, if you stay on for like the last minute or two of the session, Pete, I'm going to find you that help file. So I'm using writing and sketch tools with LabArchives. But in the meantime, this did give me the opportunity to show you a sketch tool, which I, demoed so nicely for you here with this nice, scientific drawing. So you have the ability to edit that, add in shapes, for example, where you can click Save to Page. And that type of sketch tool is available, but that is because I've selected an entry, and that's the sketch entry. So I'd like to talk about some of our downloadable tools that are available for use in LabArchives. Through our triple dot menu, the two tools I want to talk about are Folder Monitor and Microsoft Office plugin. So these are optional tools that you would have to separately install on your local device in order to use them with LabArchives. They both give you different ways, basically, of getting data into LabArchives and with working and managing the data. Folder Monitor is the first one I'd like to introduce you to. So I have a screenshot of what the application looks like should you launch it from your computer after you install it. So Folder Monitor basically gives you an opportunity to create a rule to watch a local folder on your computer. So depending on how you organize your data, manage your research data, maybe you've got a variety of different files that you're just saving locally to your computer to a folder. If you create a rule to that folder, it's a very quick and easy way for Folder Monitor to watch the folder. Anytime something new goes into the folder or an edit is made to a document that resides in that folder, that will get moved into LabArchives for you. So it is a really kind of like a nice hands-off approach to getting data into LabArchives very quickly. We see a lot of teams that will do this with, for example, imaging data. You've got a particular piece of equipment in lab, it's producing images around the clock. If you can have those images directed to a local file folder system on your PC, create a rule, then all that data goes into LabArchives without you having to do anything. So that's Folder Monitor. The next downloadable tool I want to talk about is our Microsoft Office plugin. So, working with Office documents and LabArchives is so important. So many teams work with Word or Excel documents, and we provide you with a few different ways to work with those documents. And which one is best for you depends on your workflow. So we do want to introduce you to both options today. Now, if I first go back to the page that we created a few minutes ago, you'll remember we uploaded some Excel documents. Now with Excel, one of our integration, or I should say with Office, we integrate with Office Online. When you upload an Office document to LabArchives, you'll see this little tool tray. I'm going to click the edit icon. This allows me to edit the document while I'm in LabArchives. I don't have to leave LabArchives to do that. I don't even have to download the document. I can come in very quickly, do my edits. Simultaneous editing is supported, and also automatic saving. So that when I just close this document, my saves are captured, the page is refreshed, my name and date, my timestamp has been updated. And if I go back to double check my work, you'll see my data and my changes have been captured. Now, this is usually kind of our key follow-up question. This did not automatically save the changes back to my desktop version of Word, but I've got two options. If that's something that's important to me, where I want basically a synced copy or a matching copy in two places, one locally, one in LabArchives, I do have an option to download the document back to myself. Or what you might want to consider in making this part of your workflow is to instead use the Microsoft Office plugin. The plugin, as I showed you before, through our triple dot menu, it's available under the downloads. So what I'll do next is to bring up an Excel document. I'm going to go to my File menu. This shows you the plugin when it's been installed and how that works. So you can see it kind of partners up and is added to your Office documents. So the workflow, I think that this works especially good for, and I think especially for Excel. If you think about the researchers that live and breathe in Excel files all day long, and maybe you own some of those Excel files and you're constantly adding and capturing data to Excel. So I'm adding my data, and I need that data also visible in LabArchives. So it starts by me opening up that Excel document from my desktop, just as I've done. I'm going to my files, save as, I'm going to save a local copy, make it onto my desktop, for example. So I have a local copy available. I also want to send it to LabArchives. File menu, save as to LabArchives. It asks me where I want to organize that. So this is the plugin working now. So I've got my notebook names at the top. I would choose that. Then I choose where I wanted to send the file. And I want to send it to that new page that we created earlier. Click the Save button. And that document has been sent to LabArchives. That's not the wow factor, because you saw how easy it was to upload and send documents to LabArchives. That's just kind of the first piece here. And let me refresh the page so you see that document. So at the bottom, there's that new Excel file. Here's the kind of the powerful component of this particular tool. I come back in an hour and I need to do more edits to that document. Bear with me here. Let me get to the right Excel. It's this one. And I'm adding more data after lunch, more to put into this document. So I'm working in this document all day long. I click the Save button. Here's the important part. Now it remembers and reminds you that this document is synced to LabArchives. So not only are you making the changes locally to your version of the document, you're sending it to LabArchives, and it gives you that nice reminder. So that's a really nice feature and the benefit for those documents. And if it's part of your workflow that you prefer to work off of the native Excel, and you want to work off of it locally, and you want a synced matching copy from your desktop to LabArchives. So again, if we come back into that document and we go into the revisions history, that is all captured by the revision history. Just as before, you'll see the revert version option as well. One last entry type I want to introduce you to very quickly. It's something that we call widgets. Widgets are also part of our new menu. You can select the widget menu. You'll see access to about 24 built-in widgets. with the ability to also create custom widgets. So to give you a quick show of what some of our widgets look like that you can embed to the page, I'll go to my templates and widget page here and show you some of those sample widgets. Actually, I think I've got a better page here, safety information and widgets complete. Some of our most popular widgets, it's our freezer box widget. You can add this to a page so that it reflects the size of your freezer box here. You can customize the look, the feel, embed the data in the cell. This is a database widget that you can insert. So it gives you a nice, sleek way to upload a CSV file. We'll create a database for you. This is an example of a custom widget that you create. A widget at its core basically gives you the ability to create a form with interactive elements. So you could create a form with text boxes, pull down menus, radio buttons, for example. For teams that want to create something like this, we have a lot of help files, but also you can consult with our support team and we can help you get started on how you can create something like this so that's reusable for your team. And it's really just a way to standardize the capture and entry of data, but then it also helps for the people that need to review the data, do a notebook audit. It's always going to be in a consistent format for them. So it does make their job easier as well. Now, along the way, we've talked about not only adding the data to the page, but managing that data. So we talked about view revisions, for example. A few other things that I want to point out. If you put something on a page and it's in the wrong place, that's what these down arrows and up arrow will let you control the placement of the entry. So if I need to push it down further, I can do that with the entry. You'll always have the ability to edit. The comments feature that I showed you there before is with our little comment cloud. You have your share options. And then through your more menu, you saw some of these at work earlier, such as the revision history. If I wanted to apply a tag, I would be able to do that here. A lot of our teams will create a controlled vocabulary or taxonomy that's specific to their project, for example. You could create those tags, have them available for your team, reuse them, place them on your items. Then when you click on a tag, you'll do a search across your notebook for any other documents that use the herbicide tag, for example. So next, let's go ahead and talk about access to the notebook itself. We talked about the structure, some options you have, how you can get the data into the notebook. Now we want to talk about actually managing the users that have access to your notebook. So I'm going to go to our triple dot menu here and notebook settings. Under notebook settings will be user management. You will only see user management if you're the owner of the notebook or the notebook administrator. And this is where you'll invite people to your notebook. So you'll come in here through new user, enter that, plug in the email address. When you first invite someone, they're by default a user. So if you look at Hermione here, she's a user in my notebook. But then I can make her an admin or downgrade her to a guest, for example. My particular notebook has signing and witnessing turned on. That's something I'll preview for you here in a moment. It's also where I can remove access. So let's say Hermione is leaving the team. She's no longer going to be a member of our particular lab. If I remove her access, it's not deleting her contributions. She just simply can't use the notebook, can't see the data. This is also where you can transfer ownership. So I gave you the example earlier where if you're playing the role of the lab manager, you create the notebook, you might want to transfer it to your PI. That'll allow you to do that here with this particular button. Now this level here is inviting somebody to the entire notebook. There could be situations where you don't want somebody to see everything, but you want to limit their access to a section of the notebook. You would do that by right-clicking on the notebook section. It could be a folder, it could be a page. You would go to the share section. And this time you're limiting their access just to that particular section. You will give them view only access or edit access. Now let's come back to signing and witnessing. So signing and witnessing is turned on and off by the notebook owner under notebook settings. So my notebook, I have it turned on. That's why I see these little checkbox in these the columns here. So I can decide who has signing options or privileges and witnessing privileges. Now to sign a page, let's go back to the page that we created earlier. That's under the Page Tools section. And when you sign a page, it locks the page so that no more edits, no more changes can take place. A lot of teams like this because that might be part of their policy to lock a page after an experiment is complete and the information has been approved and agreed upon. Now in my notebook, kind of have that extra. So I've got the page signing. On top of that, I have the page witnessing that's been applied. I then have to select a witnesser. When I select a witnesser, they receive an email notice that a page is pending their witness. Part of the notifications also come up in your activity feed. Now, I'm not actually going to sign this page, but I will show you what those pages look like. This is an example of a signed page. It's been locked. You have name, date, and timestamp. Here's an example of a witness page. So in addition to the sign, you see the witness details as well. I do want to talk about downloading notebook and data, and I know there's quite a few questions that have popped up, so then I'll come back to all those questions. For download, let's say there's a particular page that I want to download, or maybe it's a folder. You right-click on that section of the notebook, and you'll have your PDF. So this is going to be downloading the content into a PDF, which you might want to save or quickly print off. We separately had the question, I think it was from Jed, about downloading your entire notebook. So you can also do that through the triple dot menu, and you're going to go to your utilities section where you can create an offline notebook or notebook to PDF. Now, these two examples I have here via screenshot. The big difference is that the offline notebook is an offline HTML-based zip file. So all those files are included within that zip file. It retains the structure of your notebook. It looks like your notebook, and it also includes all the attachments. The difference with the PDF version is that it also is going to look like your notebook, but the attachments are not physically included and stripped. Instead, you have a link to access the attachments. So if I scroll down, you'll see here, I have a link to then download the attachment. So that's a big difference between the two versions there. I do want to show you some sample templates. That'll be the final thing before we move over into Q&A. But a variety of template pages here. So template pages is something that, as an individual researcher, you might want to create consistent look and feel every time you enter in an experiment, for example. From a team perspective, you may also want to do this, again, consistent standardization. So when you create a template, it's just a series of headings and rich text entries. Purpose objective goes here. Here's your placeholder with some directions on entering the data. Here's your procedure, how you should enter in your procedure. So you would do that for each section of the page. If I created that template and I want to reuse it, I want to copy the template. When you go to the new menu and you go to copy existing page, that's how you can copy, and if you were to use templates. So for example, I'm going to go to safety information and we're going to find that particular template. It was my traditional lab notebook template. I'm going to continue, copy all the versions. I have multiple copies. That's why it says copy-copy. So we'll create that again. It falls my new copy to the bottom of that section. That would be the version I would begin to update. Again, if let's say something's not where it should be and I want to move this somewhere else in my notebook, I can do that. A lot of teams will create a folder for templates and manage all the templates there separately. Okay, so that was a quick tour, introduction to using LabArchives to manage your research data. A bunch of questions. So I'm going to start going through our questions. Now, I also realize we've got about 4 minutes left. I'm happy to stay on until we can get through all these questions. Some of you may have to leave. Remember, you can email me if you do want a copy of the recording. So I'm going to drop in my email here for any of you that may have to leave here soon. And that's where you can request a copy of the recording. Okay, so just dropped you my email and I'll go ahead and start getting through questions. Is the storage of data in LabArchives HIPAA compliant? It sure is. And that's actually, Brad, under one of your FAQs here. So we are HIPAA compliant. Also, the university did a thorough check, has a BAA agreement in place as well. So they've done all of the vetting and also have supported LabArchives for HIPAA compliance and to allow you to store HIPAA data. Are there any programs that do not work in adding files into the notebook? No. Any file format can go into LabArchives. Your only restriction is up to 4 GB per attachment. Now, there could be cases, Christy, where you don't want to upload the file, you want to link to the file. So if it has some sort of a persistent URL, you might do that if it's onto another online resource, for example. So this next one here, Nicholas. So you, it's a longer one. So you have experiments that generate files and CSV files in a standard format, .csv. You mentioned it'd be helpful if LabArchives consolidate these individual experiment.csv files into a single searchable data repository so that you could have single consolidated files rather than, let's say, 100 individual experiment files. Is there a way to upload individual files in such a way that information is deposited in a secure database? So how about, Nicholas, a zip file? I had somebody else we're working with recently send us a lot of different Word documents for processing to put into LabArchives. They sent it as a zip file, and I uploaded that zip file into LabArchives and did it that way. Perhaps you could look at trying that. The other thing that you could do, when you do our attachment upload, remember that you can upload up to 50 files at a time. You might also look at, Nicholas, using Folder Monitor. So if you have the files locally on your local filing system on your PC, use Folder Monitor to create a rule, and we'll upload all of the data and retain the folder structure. But if you don't want individual files, it's a little tricky. The only thing I could recommend is uploading as a zip file. You could do this too, Nicholas. When I was sharing our widgets, we have a CSV widget right here. I don't know if this will work, but it's an idea. This basically is our CSV database widget. The CSV was uploaded into LabArchives, and this is what it looks like. So it's like a visible, searchable, individual database. Now it's still going to create a separate entry, but that's something to think about as well. Your other options, Nicholas, maybe you want to look at how you format your pages, your folders, for example. It would be difficult if you don't want separate files for each of those CSVs, though. If they're not separate files, you lose the searchability, I believe. You know, it's when it's a separate entry is when something becomes searchable. So we might have to kind of get together and brainstorm a little bit more on that. So Nicholas, maybe shoot a ticket over to our support team if you want to kind of talk about that offline further. Somebody asked me what's a BAA. I forget the full acronym, but basically it's a business agreement. So it's used for a lot of medical institutions to classify, to approve data for use for HIPAA reasons. Yep. So that actually, Brad, that's part of your FAQs. You've got an FAQ here about HIPAA data and PHI as approved by the university for storage in LabArchives.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Okay, I'm still filtering through the questions. If somebody's asked about coding languages in LabArchives, great question. So we've got a few different entries that might be suitable for that as well. So we have a lot of researchers that do use and store coding here, but it's really to store the code itself rather than run the code through LabArchives. So for example, if we go to our entry menu, you go to our plain text entry, it's really been created largely for the storage of code. It's also can be used for markdown entry. So it's nice here too. You can enter in your markdown. You have a preview window that's available. So that's great for the storage of code. So it'll create its own entry for that code. We also integrate with Jupyter Notebooks. So we have a lot of people that use Jupyter Notebooks for creating and managing their code, and we integrate with Jupyter. So to show you how that looks like, I have a Jupyter page. And it shows you can integrate with a Jupyter Notebook. And then the nice integration means that when you're viewing, we have basically the Jupyter viewer embedded in our notebook. So Grace, we have a help file on that as well. And if you want some extra details, contact our support team and we'll hook up one-on-one to talk about that a bit more if that's part of your workflow. Okay. Okay, I don't see any other questions that have come through, but I am still here. So I'll plan to hang out for another 5 minutes or so for any other questions that may filter through. Support at labarchives.com. Questions in the future. You want to request a one-on-one consult, or maybe you want like a team session. Sometimes what happens is, there's one member of the team attends a session, thinks LabArchives is great, but then you got some convincing to do for your colleagues. So if you ever want like kind of that team approach where we work with your team, help you get started, that's the type of session that we can provide also. Okay. So one more last time, support at labarchives.com. And I'm leaving you with my email address as well. And of course, thank you guys. And don't forget about your local resource page here too. And that's the page I'll actually stay with. Just to remind you, you can go to that and all different FAQs are included. And it gives you kind of that thorough background in terms of why the university selected LabArchives, its approval, it's giving you the approval for HIPAA as well. Isaac, yes, yep, you missed the beginning. No problem. Email me for a copy of the recording. So elkabias at labarchives.com. I put in the chat panel one more time for you to see. So just shoot me an email requesting that and I'll reply with a link to the recording. Okay, well, I don't see that any other questions have been posted. I see that people are starting to drop out of the meeting too. So I think that means we are okay. Again, guys, thanks so much for your time. You need us, you know how to reach us. We can always set up separate sessions and one-on-one consults to help you get started. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Yep, bye-bye.